You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Hanno lasciato tutte le redini sul collo e le femmine naturalmente se ne approfittano.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Kat Ellinger.
Hello.
Also back in the booth is Ms. Samm Deighan.
Hi.
This week we are looking at Lina Wertmüller's 1975 film Seven Beauties. The film stars Giancarlo Gianini as Pasqualino Settebellezze, or Pasqualino of the Seven Beauties. He's a man with several sisters that he's trying to keep on the straight and narrow. When one of his sisters gets involved with a pimp, Pasqualino accidentally on purpose, murders him and is put on a path of destruction where he goes to an asylum and eventually a concentration camp. We will be spoiling this film as we go along, so if you haven't seen Seven Beauties, please go watch it and come back. We will still be here. So, Kat, when was the first time you saw Seven Beauties?
I don't think I got much into her work when we did our Elio Petri season for Daughters of Darkness, but it was around that time. And I wish that we had, because there's so much crossover. But it was only because of Giancarlo Gianini, and we talked about Good News, Petri's film on that I got into watching the other films. So about when was that? Like 5 years ago?
That was 5 years ago,
yeah, about 5 years ago. I love Italian comedy. I'm always talking about it. And I was just really surprised it took me so long to get to it, because it's got all the things that I love about Italian comedy, but turned up to 11, especially Seven Beauties, which has to be her funniest.
How about you, Sam?
I want to say the first time I saw it was 8 or 9 years ago, because I had written this paper on Salo for a grad school class, and my professor at the time recommended some other things that he thought I would enjoy, and this was at the top of the list. And I wasn't really familiar with her work at that point, and my mind was just kind of blown. It's one of those movies that you can't really prepare yourself for, I don't think.
This is my first Wertmüller. I had never seen her stuff before. I didn't even know that she was an Italian director. With that name, I thought she was a German director. And I wasn't sure if I was supposed to laugh at this film, because I think, yeah, there are funny moments, but then there's some really horrible things going on here. And it's not like Life is Beautiful, where it's just like, okay, now I'm supposed to laugh, now I'm supposed to cry, and they serve it up on a silver platter for you. This one's subtle-ish with its humor, and just that Giancarlo Giannini's character is kind of ridiculous.
And despicable.
And despicable at the same time. Yeah, I didn't know what was going on at first with the fractured timeline, so I found that very interesting. But from the get-go, those fucking opening credits with Hitler and Mussolini hanging out and all this war footage, and then this what would you call it? Like a DJ voice? This whole like, oh yeah. It's
it's a DJ voice.
It's crazy. And I'm like, okay, what am I watching now? This is just madness.
The ones who don't enjoy themselves even when they laugh. Oh yeah. The ones who worship the corporate image, not knowing that they work for someone else. Oh yeah. The ones who should have been shot in the cradle. Pow! Oh yeah.
I have to say, I loved it. This is going to be my gateway into a lot of her stuff because after seeing this, I was like, oh wow, yeah. And I love Giancarlo Giannini, so being able to see him in his prime here, I didn't realize that he and Wertmüller worked so much together.
So often. Yeah, and that's maybe why her work is a little more difficult for people to get into, because definitely Seven Beauties, but also things like Swept Away and Love and Anarchy, you don't really know how you're supposed to feel, and I think she really manipulates that. Like, she tries to make you laugh at uncomfortable things, I think not because she's trying to be an edgelord, but because she's trying to point out the sort of social taboos that make people, especially Italians in the 70s, really uncomfortable. And he is just the perfect vessel for that.
It's easy to understand why so few people have seen her work because it's so unavailable. There's only mainly these 70s titles that have had Blu-ray releases, like most of her 60s.
And only recently.
Yeah, only recently. There's a couple of her films you can't find at all. Really 60. I think her first film had a Blu-ray release a couple of years ago, but it's just so hard to find. And it's one of the things about Italian comedy. I mean, all the things you're saying, Mike, are part of Italian comedy from the 60s onwards. This, although she does it just so much more in a much more grotesque way. But when it comes to like the filmmakers that did the Italian comedies, so people like Fellini, for example, De Sica, you get on one side there's this accepting of things like La Strada or the neo-realist stuff, and obviously La Dolce Vita and 8.5 and the early De Sica stuff. But once you get to the 60s, there's like a shut off. Like you can't even get Il Sorpasso. Dino Risi's Il Sorpasso has been out of print for fucking years. And there seems to be this like weird rejection of Italian comedy, even though, and this is why I love it so much, especially through the 60s and 70s, there was so much incredible transgressive film being made within the comedy. And obviously Seven Beauties is a really good example of that, but it crosses over with people like Marco Ferreri, with people like Elio Petri. And I don't understand it. The only thing I can think of is that comedy is always seen as like somehow lesser, or maybe it doesn't cross over culturally, but I've never seemed to have had a problem with the cultural aspects, you know, all the Catholicism and stuff like that. But it's so frustrating because there's so many films that desperately need restored, but nobody's restoring them because they're just not seen as commercially viable. We've had a couple of Petris, but he remains like so, we talked about that on our episode, really totally obscure outside of the genre films that he did, which aren't really genre films, but all the stuff that Latuada was making in the 70s, 60s, 70s. I mean, there's just so much stuff. And you just know it's never going to get a release because, I don't know, maybe it makes people too uncomfortable, or maybe they just don't get it, or I don't know what it is. It's just not that audience. And I got really, really into Italian comedy because I was trying to write a book on Italian comedy and I couldn't get any publisher to take it. I'm still going to have to do it at some point, maybe just self-publish it, because there's just not a market for it outside of like a handful. I'm talking a fucking handful of films like La Dolce Vita, and then everything else. And this was a huge industry, was ignored outside of that, and it no longer exists. So even if you try and get her films now on DVD, like there's been no UK releases as far as I can tell. The Kino set that they did would cost me about £80 to import it. And that's only 3 films.
I think it's 4.
Is it 4?
I'm looking at it from across my living room, and I think it's 4.
Yeah, we've had no UK release, which I would have thought somebody like Eureka maybe would have jumped on that one, but no. DVDs are out of print and stuff is completely missing, so it just makes me so angry, because this is the first female director to be nominated for a fucking Oscar, and yet where are her films? Where's the lavish box set of her films? We've had, how many Hitchcock box sets now? How many?
1 million.
Do you know what I mean? Where is the lavish treatment of her films? It disgusts me.
It's definitely what you were saying, that it makes people uncomfortable. A lot of Americans don't expect comedy to be uncomfortable or provocative or thought-provoking. They just expect it to be kind of lighthearted and silly, which, anyone who's actually into the genre throughout cinema knows it's a lot more than that. Sometimes these films are hard to market, especially Italian comedies, because it's not what people would expect. Also, there's this big problem with bringing certain European art house movies to English language audiences, because people want exactly what Mike was saying earlier, something like Life is Beautiful, where everything is spoon-fed to you and you know how you're supposed to feel and you know how you're supposed to react. And I think with Wertmüller's films in particular, she purposefully goes against that at every opportunity. And I think Elio Petri has a similar thing going on. So it just makes people uncomfortable.
It's the same with Petri. It's the same. Where are the Marco Ferreri films? Where are they? We've had Le Grand Bouffe. That's about it. Where are they? And it is really frustrating. Like, I get it that it's not Italian comedy is like Commedia dell'Italiana is like, it's tragicomedy. But, you guys got MASH in the 70s. I thought you were, kind of into that now.
Some of us are, but not our mainstream audiences.
Most of the criticism that I read of this film was this kind of back and forth about the attitude, people were accusing Wertmüller as being a misogynistic director. And it's like, really, the main thing that I was reading is Pasqualino, is he a redemptive character? Does he learn a lesson through this?
He's an Annetto. The Annetto is like, I should start paying Jacqueline Reich money, because this theorist, this writer called Jacqueline Reich, she wrote a book called Beyond the Latin Lover about Marcello Mastroianni, which I advise anyone to buy if they want an in to this era of Italian comedy. And in her introduction, or her foundation of her thesis, she talks about the Roman ideals, in art, in ancient Rome, and she talks about the fascist period of film history. Those very early Italian comedies, so throughout the 30s, they were rip-offs of Paramount comedies, where you'd have Vittorio De Sica as the Italian Cary Grant, which I realise sounds really weird, but when you actually see the films, you see, I get it now. Because I always think of him as older, as the film director. And then the fascist period, and then obviously straight after the war, we got neorealism, and then that went into rosy neorealism, which was like a semi-comic, but it was still quite innocent. And through films like Il Sorpasso and La Dolce Vita, this new type of comedy evolved, and within that, you have this male character, which Jacqueline Reich coined the term the Annetto, the inept man. And I am fucking obsessed with the Annetto, right? I've mentioned it in every essay I've ever written about Italian. I have to get it in, because once you realise it, you see it everywhere. And I think if you don't understand the Annetto, one of the misunderstandings about Italian comedy is that it's misogynistic, especially the sex comedy, but they're not. In fact, what they're doing is satiring or really taking the piss out of masculinity as hypocritical, as frail, as self-serving. The men who were first typified by people like Marcello Mastroianni, Vittorio Gassman was also like an early one. These absolute baby men. I mean, what is the Dolce Vita about? It's about a man having a fucking existential crisis because he just don't want to like grow up and chasing women around. And, you know, it really was like, in a way, and even the sex comedies are like this. Even the stuff, you know, Sergio Martino was making around this time uses the same concept. It uses the Inetto. And I'm fascinated by the Inetto because to me, Italy, this patriarchal Catholic country, to take the male form that had always been this idea, I guess it comes out of fascism. It was like a kickback at the ideal masculine male of fascism. So they took that and they switched it around to look at how ridiculous men really are. But with films like Seven Beauties, and especially Giancarlo Gianini is like the world's best fucking Inetto.
He's the greatest.
He's just so good.
He clearly has the best time doing it.
Yeah, he obviously didn't care about, because a lot of these guys who played these characters, Marcello's another one. You often think of, you know, Marcello, who was a big sex symbol, but he'd often allow himself to be really humiliated in the roles that he played. And Giannini, he like does, which is why I so regret not having seen her films, I think, before we talked about him in Good News, because like where he's getting his cock out and asking his like female colleague, is it too small? You know, is it? And he's crying all the time.
If you like Seven Beauties, you have got to see Good News.
Yeah.
His crying is amazing.
But it's all the Inetto and Lina Wertmüller, sorry. I think with her work, from what I've seen in the bits I've read, people, they often try and other her as a woman, and they're like, oh, why is she doing this? She's a woman. But she is actually part of a big tradition in Italian cinema. And so the stuff that she's doing is no different to the stuff her mentor Fellini was doing, Petri was doing, Ettore Scola was doing, Latuada was doing, Marco Ferreri was doing. She's actually working inside of a convention. And I'm not going to say all of those films were like wildly feminist. They weren't, but a turning point probably comes in 1964 with Marriage Italian Style, where you have got Sophia Loren sort of, her character bringing out the double standards about prostitution and stuff, and women come more to the fore. So you get quite a lot of writing that tends to take her completely out of context and other her because she is a woman, and say, oh, well, why are these men, like one of the interviews I saw was, why are men the main focus of your films? That's not very feminist. But it's like, have you seen these fucking men? Have you seen these men?
This is also a problem that applies to plenty of other directors, like especially somebody like Catherine Breillat complains about this a lot. It's like there's something kind of inherently misogynistic about expecting a female director to only make quote-unquote feminist films or films about women. If men can make films about women, why can't women make films about whatever the fuck they want? Why does it have to be this sort of narrow little niche?
Oh, it's ridiculous. And I think in using the Inetto, subversive filmmakers were able to say a lot more about society and how wrong it was and how it affected women. And Seven Beauties doesn't necessarily do that as much. Seduction of Mimi would be like a good example of
Love and Anarchy, definitely.
Love and Anarchy, but it exposes all the shit that women have to live under by showing you how men operate. And by using a male character, she's able to go into men's spaces and show how ridiculous and selfish they are and how inept they are. I mean, this guy in this film is like fucking accidentally killing someone. You know, he goes in for his big shoot. I mean, he is so good, though. He is so good. And I think this is definitely a funniest, but like real, like this actually makes me laugh out loud.
It's very difficult for me to imagine this film being as funny without Giancarlo Gianini. If you had somebody who was less hamming it up and less charming and less charismatic, because even when he's sort of made to be disgusting and deplorable, he's still super charismatic and gorgeous.
And the crying, though, it's all the crying.
The crying is my favorite. He takes it so seriously.
This is the first film where I've really seen Mussolini be made fun of so openly. I talked about those opening credits, but then there are moments where Giancarlo is actually imitating Il Duce, and I was just like, at first I didn't understand what he was doing, and then after a little bit, when the guys around him started chanting Duce, 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 I was like, oh, okay, he's doing Il Duce.
Italians!
What now?
Let us welcome the war for the virtues it can bring out.
He thinks he's Mussolini.
In those of us who have the guts to fight, we're making history. Our people are a race of artists and warriors. Great artists, great warriors.
It's very funny.
Our people are poets and heroes.
Hey, he's out of his mind.
And that is their fame. The challenge this breed poses is a threat to all on Earth.
I was very surprised that they take on Il Duce and that there's that amazing thing. So he manages to, like I said, he kills his sister's pimp, and then he has to dispose of the body, which is hilarious.
The farting body.
And then he ends up getting 12 years in an asylum, I guess it is. But he sat next to this guy who's also is getting sent up the river. And Giancarlo has, or Pasqualino has gotten 12 years. This guy has gotten, 28 years. And what was it for? It was basically for a thought crime because he was a socialist instead of a fascist. And so it just really points out the absurdity of how it is. And this, I think it's set, right before the war and then eventually part of the war. So it took me a little while too to figure out when the timing was of this film. Once pretty early on, you're behind enemy lines. So it's like, okay, now I know that it's World War II, but I wasn't even sure if I was flashing forward or flashing back, which one was the past and which one was the future or the present. And so finally, once I got that, I was like, okay, now I understand what's going on. But for whatever reason, it took me a little while to make those transitions.
The director said it, and I don't know where the interview was, where I'm quoting from, but she did say that even the period films were meant to be applicable to the time she was making them. And this was the years of lead. You know, it was a really difficult time in Italy with, and the thing I think that also really confuses some of the critics that I've read is they can't quite figure out where her politics lie. And it was the same with Petri, which is why I keep comparing them, because Petri started off a socialist, and by the 70s, he got very kind of disenchanted with this idealism of Marxism. And so he made The Working Class Go to Heaven, which basically showed the unions and the students and the industrialists is all fucking ridiculous. And she does the same thing. It's all anyone in power is ridiculous or exploitative, so there is a lot of parallel to that, and I don't think you can take them out of that climate. So she's like using the years of fascism really to talk about what was happening in the 70s, where you had just so much shit going on in the 70s. It was such a crazy time in Italian history. I know Samm knows all the bombing dates and who got assassinated.
I really, at some point, should probably, or we collectively should do some sort of book on this. It's endlessly fascinating.
Jolly.
I think it's jolly subject matter. It also has interesting parallels if you watch some of these films now with the current political violence that's going on and all the protests and the ways that people are feeling really frustrated. Yes, there are certain cultural things that it could help to know and certain political and historical things, but really this sense of imminent violence and frustration, it makes these worth watching again and again, and especially now.
He's supposed to be some sort of Lothario, and that's the way that he dresses and acts. He seems like he's just, there's one woman that he speaks to, I guess, around the end of the first act, and then she comes back at the very end of the film. And yeah, he is very seductive towards her.
He's a spiv, though, isn't he? He's like this, he thinks he's seductive, but he's also kind of ridiculous, which I love his character at the beginning.
When it comes to who he makes love to in the film, he basically rapes a woman on a gurney, or tries to, and then he has sex with the commandant of the prison camp, or tries to. Again, he's the most ineffectual lover that there is.
Pretty much, which I think is what makes him such a, and I mean, not just this character, but Giancarlo in general, is the way that he plays this Inetto type is so physical. Like, it's not just him moaning and complaining about things, but it's like the crying and the sort of attempts to be sexual and attempts to be violent. And it's like they all kind of fail.
Oh, he's so wonderful, though. He really is. Especially when jumping ahead now, but he's also impotent by the end of it as well. It's like he has to endure every single form of humiliation. I really love it when he goes in to kill this guy. They got like this almost Western soundtrack playing, and he's having his showdown. The gun accidentally goes off. And he goes, is that guy like his lawyer or something, or his friend? But he basically just gets told off for not like being prepared. And then they go through this whole thing of how the mafia get rid of bodies, and we invented the 3-person coffin, and so like, and even then he can't get that right. He gets very clear instructions because he's such a fucking big head and he can't calm down. He ends up admitting what he's done. And so his lawyer's just like, you're fucked. What have you done? And it's in every newspaper.
His lawyer is so foreign to the idea of confession. He's just like, what, confession? What are you confessing for? You totally ruined your legal defense. You shouldn't confess to anything ever.
But this is where that climate comes into it, because everything was like really contaminated and corrupt in the 70s. Government, the religious orders, there was just so much corruption. And so and the mafia were running everything as well. And so she gets that into this, and she uses it in some of her other films as well to like comment on, I guess, like contemporary problems in that Italian society was very, very corrupt because of the economic miracle, which she also pokes at that in a lot of her films, but not this one. But that whole power thing. So it is, I think, applicable to any time that you put it in, because power will always be an issue. She just uses like extremes of power. So using the Nazis, using the prison system. And this is just a very sad little man who's desperate to have any power. Like, he can't control his sister. She's become a prostitute. He can't even do an honour killing without ballsing it up. He's put in a psychiatric hospital. I don't think we've mentioned that, have we? He fakes madness because he's basically ballsed up by confessing. And his lawyer's like, the only thing that's going to get you off the firing squad is if you say you're mad. So he goes into an institution, tries to rape this woman in there, which is the rape joke. And the real joke of it is, though, it's like he can't even do that. Like, everything he tries, he just can't do it. He's so pathetic. I think a lot of people would see that scene and think, oh, this is hideous, this is horrible. And it's meant to be grotesque. That's part of the convention of that type of comedy, but it's never lascivious.
It's never mean-spirited in the way that you would expect it to be, I think.
No, it's not exploitative of like the the quote-unquote victim who you don't ever really feel as a victim because she just starts shrieking at him and he can't show it. It's just a whole setup isn't really to look at rape or even comment about rape. All it is to show you how ridiculous this guy is, like how pathetic he is. And to him, failure to perform is like death, because he is like this real, she often does this, these kind of chest puffy little Italian men who think they're it, and then she totally deconstructs them by the end of the film and just breaks them down. And I love that. I don't know if she was necessarily being feminist in that way, but she was commenting on something that was prevalent in Italian society, that ridiculous stereotype. She was commenting on that, but I did read she said she never wanted to be remembered or praised just for being a woman. That would make her feel sad.
She definitely has that in common with a number of my favorite female directors who just saw themselves as people who made films that often harshly criticized society, but that weren't specifically about women or for women. And what she's trying to do here is show these extremes of power. And I think it's so interesting to me that there are a number of really kind of transgressive Italian films from the mid-70s that do focus on World War II, mostly because they're trying to say something about extremes of power. Like Salo and The Night Porter.
The Conformist is another one, and that's another kind of ridiculous man, but he's not as
in a different
silly.
way.
Yeah, ridiculous in a non-comical way. In quite a nasty way. It does seem to be this
Yeah, he's more like Iago.
This real sort of outpouring comes, doesn't it, at the end of the 60s, and you see a lot of these directors start to use things like World War II to really just comment on the stuff that they, you know. It's interesting, she often gets compared to Fellini, and Fellini had that grotesque thing with the big women. Like there is a little bit of an influence. But Fellini was quite apolitical. Even when he, like Amarcord, which came out, I think, just before this, is set in the fascist era, but it's almost like a romantic version. He didn't seem to comment either way. He wasn't interested in that. Whereas she seemed much more invested in examining, like, these institutions. And so I think you said earlier, Sam, about Giancarlo being still sympathetic. One thing that she did was she showed that it was unfair on everyone. You know, women suffered under that system, but so did the men, because quite often these men have these moral obligations put on them by tradition. And in this case, it all starts because this guy, Pasqualino, feels like he has to defend the honour of his family as the man of the house. So she showed equally how it hurt men and women, which I think is quite remarkable. But then I guess that then makes it confusing because she's not on this like big agenda to attack men.
I was very happy at one point when he's in the asylum, the cross-eyed guy from Salo shows up just briefly.
Yes!
I don't even know if he has a line.
Exciting.
It's so exciting seeing him turn up. He's only in it like for a few seconds though, isn't he? But he's got the look. Like perhaps they were like, we need someone who looks like they've been in an asylum, and it's like that dude. No offense to him whatsoever.
And you mentioned the grotesque, and you mentioned the large women, and Shirley Stoller, I was so happy to see her show up. I loved her so much. She was just wonderful in everything that she was ever in. Some folks might not be familiar with the name, but she was mostly known for The Honeymoon Killers. I grew up watching her as Mrs. Steve on Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Pee-wee, lock the doors, shut the windows, hide. What is it, Mrs. Steve? There's a monster on the loose. Ah! A monster!
Wait a minute, I don't believe in monsters.
Look! Is it the monster?
No, you said the secret word, Mrs. Steve.
I'm telling you, I saw a monster. It had a big round eye and 2 mouths. It was horrible. I have to go warn the other people in the neighborhood.
You think Mrs. Steve really saw a monster, Pee-wee?
No, there's no such thing as monsters.
I'm scared anyway.
So she's just wonderful in this as this commandant of the prison camp, the concentration camp. It could go Ilsa very easily, but it definitely doesn't. But every single time she's on screen, she's just electrifying.
Yeah, she's incredible. And I think that's one of the things that I love so much about all of Wertmüller's films that I've seen is most of her characters are people who do things that seem very over the top, whether they're crying and tearing their hair or trying to rape someone or acting like she does. But she gets such sincere performances from people who just aren't afraid to look ridiculous or aren't afraid to sort of go against type. There's so much about her films that I think is surprising. Even watching a film from the mid-70s now, it's like you still don't really see anything like this.
Can we mention Elena Fiore as well? The other larger ladies, the sister, because she appears in a few of her films. She's in my favourite role of hers is Seduction of Mimi, where she plays this large wife of a love rival, and just that focus on strange and interesting bodies. I think that's the only part that really feels Fellini-esque to me about her work, is this obsession with faces and bodies that aren't typical. And I do love that, but it gives it like a weird sort of carnival aspect. I don't think she's just merely a Fellini copyist, and I've seen her written about like that. Oh, she just copied her mentor and blah, blah. I think there's a lot more going on to that. I think she's like Fellini in that she was very intuitive and was more interested in the human experience. So she would show people in very human, absurd situations, because life is absurd, not as absurd as Seven Beauties, obviously.
It can be.
Or it can be, though, yeah. But
she really strove to show a wide range of characters. And so a lot of the time, they don't just look and act like people in conventional films, which I think is so refreshing and makes them feel so new in a way. Even still, it's like you don't have the same sort of thin, conventionally attractive people acting in ways you expect them to act. There is definitely something carnivalesque about it that is just so joyful.
Yeah, you never know which way they're going to turn.
She'd often take really good-looking actresses as well and put them give them grotesque characters, for example. She never, which is wonderful, but that again was read as being misogynistic. It's like, well, with the prison camp commandant, with Shirley Stolar's character, it's like, well, that's not very feminist. You've made this woman hideous, The scene when he has to sleep with her, though, is fucking incredibly feminist. She takes that stock, almost Nazi-exploitation scene of young, quivering...
Oh, yeah. I think she does it totally on purpose.
Yeah, or the Charlotte Rampling in The Night Porter, say, who gets undressed in this very uncomfortable way, who's dehumanized... And you have the male commandant sat looking down. She completely reverses that to put a woman in that spot. And I think that's incredible. I just think that is an incredible thing. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. It makes me want to cheer.
Step, go ahead.
What did you say? I'm sorry, but did I hear right? You asked me to strip.
That's a different side of feminism in film, especially, is being able to show women doing all of these things that they're not usually shown to be able to do, whether that's being grotesque or being sexual or being violent or craving power. And that's why I love directors like her and Breillat so much, and Claire Denis also to a different extent, because they spend so much time exploring those things, often in kind of maybe subtle ways where it's like they're not beating you over the head with it. It's not the full point of the film. It's just something included.
No, because it's also used for comedy. It's really genius how she does it. So because the situation is absurd. His little chicken legs with the hair on them and his little shirt and the fact that he's too exhausted and he can't get it up. And, it is really, really funny. But when you look at it, just how she shows the Commandant and how the Commandant's got like this real sort of pragmatic, practical view to sex. She's very masculine about it. She's like, come on, we're going to get on with it. And if you can't do it, I'm just going to kill you. So just come on there. And she's yawning because he's like, whereas he's thinking about sex in that scene as being linked to desire. So he's having to like conjure up his first love. And, he normally you see the man just being very mechanical about it, but she has the woman being very mechanical. And it's stuff like that is so fucking, I was trying to think, I don't think I've ever seen it played out in that way anywhere else. Not on those terms. She's not even just sexually aggressive. She's almost like...
She's treating it like a base need and nothing else. It's like somebody who's hungry and makes himself a sandwich. That's her attitude.
I love the lighting in that scene, that green light that's going across and just making everything even more grotesque. And her being in power and stripping, and she just keeps stripping and stripping and stripping, but then by the end she still has like an undershirt and men's very mannish looking jockey shorts on. So she is the least sexual object that you could possibly get, and him just trying to think about his first love Fifi and trying to get it up. And I love when he finally gets it up and is trying to shtup her. And when she goes, I want to see your eyes, and just lifts up his lids. That look on his face is just priceless.
It is so wonderful. And I can see why it makes people uncomfortable, though. But I think it's just genius. I don't think she was misogynistic, far from it, but she also wasn't sort of making an agenda out of feminism either. I don't think you could have made an agenda out of feminism in 70s Italy, because she was basically the only female filmmaker. I mean, Italy was deeply misogynistic. I remember Catherine Spack went on Italian television about 3 years ago and sort of, I think around the time of Me Too, she wasn't doing a Me Too, but she was talking about when she went to Italy as an actress in the early 60s and was working with all these like really big respected names, just how nasty it was, like how misogynistic it was, how the cast and the crew would treat her like shit. She lost custody of her kid because she was an actress and that was considered a prostitute. And Wertmüller was like working within that, somehow managed to hold her own within that, and made a fucking spaghetti western, which we haven't mentioned. It wasn't like France where a female voice was starting to emerge, or America by the early 70s. Feminist filmmakers are starting to emerge. That wasn't in Italy at all. So I think she had to be much more subversive about that, rather than sort of coming out and having an agenda about it, because I can't imagine how difficult it was for her to work in that field. Just the fact that she was there alone is an incredible thing.
We haven't mentioned Fernando Rey, who is one of his two friends at the concentration camp. It took me a little while to even recognize Fernando Rey, because the makeup on all of these guys, they just look horrible.
Oh my God, I can't look at his makeup in this. It's so horrible.
It's really bad. But the thing that really gets me is how there's this white stuff everywhere. And I'm pretty sure that we are to imply that all of this white stuff that is everywhere is ash from the dead bodies, because this is one of the most harrowing presentations of a concentration camp. Just all of these dead bodies every place, and the guys who are in charge of moving the bodies from one place to another or throwing them into the crematorium. I can see, Sam, why your professor recommended this along with to watch with Salo, because, man, it is really gut-wrenching. And, yeah, everybody just looks beat to shit.
And again, it's completely unemotional when we see people moving bodies and how the officers are. It's the same as the sex scene. They're just bored and indifferent, which I think is, in a way, even more powerful than something that sets out to be overly shocking, like Sallow, is the fact that they're just obviously so desensitized to it. Just so, like, and all the people, all his friends in the camp, you know, when they get a chance to be shot, they're like, me, you know, let me go. I just can't take it anymore. Those aspects of it are so powerful.
Fernando Rey's death scene and Francesco, Piero de Iorio, I'm butchering that, I'm sure, but when he sees Pedro die and then has to kill Francesco, and he's doing this so that not everybody in the camp or everybody in his barracks will die. He has to choose 6 people to be killed, otherwise everybody dies. Oh man, it is just one of these horrific Sophie's Choice type choices where it's just like, wow. You know, I was talking earlier how people were saying like, oh, his character never changes. He's not affected by this stuff. And I have to say bullshit, because the final shot of the film, when his mother is there like, oh, you survived. And he's just like, yes, I'm still alive. And I think that's the last line of the film is, I'm still alive. And then you get that shot of his face.
Did they watch the same film?
That's what I wonder.
I'm confused.
So I think...
Did they bring the house lights up too soon?
Well, this is something that I find really frustrating, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it while I was finishing my World War II book, is people want to be spoon-fed things. Like, they need the melodramatic music that tells you this scene is sad, and this character is having all of the sad feelings. And something like this is so much more nuanced and complicated, and I think speaks to this idea that when people are put in these horrible situations, often this thing takes over where their brains run on survival instinct. And so they're able to do things that are quite horrible because that allows them to survive. That's the only reason that they're surviving. But once they're through the ordeal, it's like, at what cost did you survive? And when people like Hannah Arendt wrote about stuff like this after the war, like, she was attacked. She got death threats for suggesting that Jews were complicit in certain things or perpetrated certain things in the concentration camps, like people in positions of power within the camps. But she herself was a Holocaust survivor. So it's like this idea that tragedy, especially World War II, but I think just tragedy in general, doesn't exist in this easy to understand black and white scale, is very challenging for people. And when you have films that are like Seven Beauties, where everything just seems really horrible and there's no kind of easy answer, or scenes where it's like, oh yes, here's how we're supposed to feel, and here's, you know, the heroic character doing the right thing. He's the opposite of heroic and always does the wrong thing, but it doesn't make the end any less gutting. And so I just, like what you just said, Kat, I don't understand the reviews for this film in particular. It's like, who are these people? What movie did they watch?
I don't get it. I think Pasqualino, he's not a bad person. He is just someone who tries to get by, and he's someone who tries to survive, but he's not someone without feeling. I think sometimes he thinks he's even trying to do the right thing, like with the sister and everything, but he's just a bit rubbish at everything. And so when he goes to the commandant, he is just basically trying to save his own skin, and he's punished for that, because that's when he's made, oh, we'll put you in charge. So if he was this horrible person, he would have got into that, but he doesn't. He tries to resist it, and it's that or he dies, and he's not the hero. And maybe it's that he's not the hero, but, you know, not everyone was a hero. I think a lot of people...
Most people weren't.
...had to do what they did to survive, and so it's a lot more complex than that. But I think it's quite clear at the end that he's changed. Like, he's not the same person anymore, and you really feel for him. You just really feel bad. Even with his friend wants to go in and he still doesn't put his friend's name in there. He can't bring himself to do it, even though he's asked. Fernando Del Rey's character. What sort of brain you'd have to not kind of notice, the look of like pure existential angst on his face when he says, "I'm alive" at the end, which is like a punch to the gut.
She has that in most of her films, at least all of the ones I've seen. There is just this sense, like you feel gutted by the time the film is over.
The Giannini ones, without giving spoilers for them, all kind of end on the same note of a guy just being left bereft and completely dismantled and sometimes sobbing or screaming after being completely... Those films in particular with him, which is why they're my favourites of hers, because I don't know, it's him. It's like Sam said, it's him. It's something about him. You kind of want him to survive and you want him to just get something right. And like, she denies his characters like every single time. And so you're just left at the end of the film. Like, you get lots of laughs along the way, but you're left just feeling like, oh, poor Giancarlo.
But I think it also speaks to his really incredible talent, and he's just such an amazing actor. Like, it's hard to think about actors who could convincingly do this sort of wide range, very physical performance, and who would also let themselves be systematically humiliated throughout an entire series of films.
Yeah. I mean, God, he just really goes through it in every single film. He is just... I think he's such a wonderful presence, though.
I love him so much.
There's just something about, like you said, Sam, like a charisma or something. He's not like the Lino Banfi, who I love. Like, Lino Banfi was like the Italian Danny DeVito before Danny DeVito. He's in shitloads of sex comedies, and his stock character always is the lead. Was the unfortunate man who would just fuck up all the time, and he'd often be married to people like Barbara Boucher, which seemed inexplicable. But he'd always be ridiculous. But from the minute you saw him, he looked funny. Like his character, like he's really short and dumpy and going bold, and that was his thing. Giancarlo isn't like that because he is sexy as well, but she kind of strips him of that. But he's not like ugly or anything, he is a beautiful man, so...
But she makes him look as fucking ragged as possible in this movie.
Uh-huh.
With his little hat on. When he gets that little hat in there. I love his little hat in the hospital.
She gives him such extreme under-eye circles in this movie that it's like, I think he has them naturally a little bit, but if you watch this back-to-back with something like Swept Away, he looks like two totally different people.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were talking about Sophia Loren earlier, and to see the way she made Sophia Loren look, she doesn't look like the same person at all. It's strange because she looks a lot like the woman that she normally worked with in like Swept Away and Seduction of Mimi, Marangela Malato.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, she almost can make Sophia Loren look like her.
I was going to say about Giancarlo, is it Love and Anarchy where he's got that crazy freckle face?
Yes.
Yes. It is. And
just mad
is
freckles.
Seduction of Mimi the one where he has the similar sex scene in that like shack by the beach?
There's an amazing sex scene in that one with a very large woman with a very large bottom. And it's framed.
It's like a companion piece to Seven Beauties.
She frames it almost in a fisheye, so the woman's backside fills up the whole front of the shot. And Giancarlo looks about 6 inches tall on this bed, clutching this like little blanket.
It's one of the best sex scenes I've ever seen. It's not
good.
Erotic, but like the way it's shot and just how funny it is.
All right, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll be right back after these brief messages.
Let me ask you a question. Are you getting enough? I bet you'd love more, right? Well, AdamandEve.com wants to give you more with 10 free gifts. First, you'll get a sexy surprise for her. Second, a specially selected toy for him. And third, a little something we know you'll both enjoy. Plus, you'll get 6 full-length adult movies on DVD. And number 10, free shipping on your entire order. So what do you have to do to get your 10 free gifts? It's not hard. Just go to AdamandEve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy, sexy piece of lingerie, or anything you desire. Just enter offer code BOOTH at checkout, and you'll get all 10 free gifts. Go check out AdamandEve.com today. Select one item and get 10 free gifts, including free shipping, when you enter offer code BOOTH. That's BOOTH at AdamandEve.com.
Hey, do you like movies? Of course you do. You're listening to Mike White's phenomenal podcast, The Projection Booth. I'm here, however, to tell you about another movie-loving podcast, The Shameless Picture Show. My name is Michael Byers, and the show was created by myself and my good buddy in filmmaking, Nick Richards, in 2016 as a way for him and I to stay connected and to keep movies in our lives. The premise is simple. Each of us composed a list of shame filled with movies we've either missed, had no interest in, or just feel the other one should have seen. We've covered a wide range of films, from Heathers, The Godfather, The Exorcist, You're the Hunter from the Future, Phantom Tollbooth, a slew of amazing Vinegar Syndrome titles, and some that are not so good, plus our massive Rocky episode that features a new interview with Lloyd Kaufman himself talking about his friendship with John G. Avildsen. And I personally can't wait for you to hear us enjoying the fight to keep film culture alive. You can find our show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and of course, SoundCloud.
Hi, I'm Dave Kittredge, filmmaker in Los Angeles, and I'm the host of The Outcast, presented by Outfest, a new podcast where I have conversations with LGBT creators and allies to discuss their work, their inspirations, their passions, and the challenges of getting our authentic voices heard.
I was scared because I thought, oh, what am I doing? Like, here I am selling my soul. But when I realized what the movie was, I'm like, I'm in. Let's make this wonderful movie.
The freedom of ad-libbing and letting things happen in the moment. With Stephen Trask, let's write something that involves stand-up comedy, drag, punk rock.
I was so rebellious and precocious, I guess. The definition of gay to me is freedom.
Women gave the show its life, I feel like.
Well,
because
it's also a bit of a hunk fest. You guys are hot as hell.
You are too kind. That was only 15 years ago.
It's a no-holds-barred talk with iconic creators and performers.
It's not white people, it's not I hate white people, it's dear white people. It's how you start a letter.
The whole climax of the show is a sex scene between Melchior and Wendla. And I remember feeling personally self-conscious about never having been with a woman in any way, shape, or form.
I'm always thinking about the audience. Make them feel, make them laugh, and make them cry. I mean, that's as simple as it is for me.
I had been not wanting to be a part of the film. It was clear in the edit that I had to, really reshape it. So the film really told me what it needed to be.
Cinema is an empathy machine, and it sort of allows you to see yourself in people's faces that you normally wouldn't see humanity in.
I get emotional just talking about it.
And the tea is definitely spilled.
David, don't edit anything of this out.
No.
They don't want to hear all the charming stories. They want to hear the ugly, gory relationship that Jim and I have.
We're cutting that part out, by the way.
And with guests like John Cameron Mitchell, Christine Vachon, Laverne Cox, Jonathan Groff, Justin Simeon, Jim Fall, Miss Coco Peru, Rachel Mason, Jeffrey Schwartz, H.P. Mendoza, and fabulous queens Shangela, Eureka, and Bob the Drag Queen.
I'm sweating the house down.
Oh, mama.
You never know what's going to come up.
You know me, I'm so big and strong that Eureka and Bob actually hide behind me, and I protect
She
them.
is quite the chihuahua, mama. She does pop up.
I was like, wait, should we have had security the whole time?
I think they think I'm the security, bitch.
It's season 1 of The Outcast, presented by Outfest, premiering in the summer of 2020. Hope you can join us.
All right, we are back and we are talking about Seven Beauties. And Kat, you mentioned that Wertmüller did a spaghetti western, and I am super curious what that was.
Oh, it was Bella Star. What's the full title of it? The Story of Bella Star? I've never seen that one, actually. I have to admit, I've never seen it.
Me neither, and I'm dying to.
And
what kind of lady was wanted for horse stealing and bootlegging. That was no lady. That was Belle Starr.
She directed it under a male pseudonym as well. Really hard to get some of those 60s films of hers. There's another one that I've had a copy of it, an Italian copy. I think it was like maybe a third film, or no, it wasn't. It was very. She did The Lizards. Let's Talk About Men.
Oh yes,
which was like there was another Italian comedy called Let's Talk About Women, which was more traditional, and so hers seems like a reversal of that. But I've never been able to get subs for it, and my Italian doesn't go beyond Vaffanculo, which comes up a lot in these films, and Aiuta, which, because I watch a lot of Power, and that's about...
Anyone who's seen like 3 or 4 Giallo films should know what Aiuto means.
But so I don't know, and I don't know what's going on in it, which is really... It's only really when you get to The Seduction of Mimi in 72 that little bubble of films in the early 70s seem to have had some home video treatment, but it's like, where is the rest of it? Where is the earliest stuff? Or was it just because it was considered more commercial? Because she always considered herself working in commercial cinema. And the comedies that she did were kind of commercial because there was, like I said, precedent for this. It was like an established tradition. And other filmmakers were doing it. I know it seems odd to us outside of Italy, some of their editorial choices of the story. But yeah, I don't understand. I'd be dying to see. I think she did these 2 other films in the 60s that appear to be completely something about mosquitoes.
Oh yeah, it's Rita the Mosquito and Don't Sting the Mosquito. I'm dying to see them, but
yeah, you can't get them anywhere.
But it's so strange because if you think about, even like to your point about her being a commercial filmmaker, even by the late 70s, you've got stuff like A Night Full of Rain, which it's Giancarlo again, but with Candice Bergen, and like it's a U.S. co-production. So it's like she was making bigger films. I don't know why she didn't catch on. Like I don't understand it.
I watched a really good documentary about her called, well, some of it was really good. Other times I was like, okay, I want to speed ahead, but it's called Behind the White Glasses.
We can't get that in the UK anywhere, and I've been dying to see it.
It was so tough for me to find. We were talking on another podcast about like off-brand streaming services, and this one is, I guess it's not that off-brand. I guess if you buy Blu-rays and you get the digital copy code that everything's on Vudu, I think it is, and this was on Vudu. So I'm like, all right, that's the only place I could find it, and
it's relatively new, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be out there easily findable, but
it's had like very limited release in the US, from all I can see, and that's it. It's like she doesn't exist in the UK.
There are all these later films, like I don't know if Kat, if you've had a chance to see Camorra from the 80s, which is
some of her later films I haven't seen either.
Yeah, I'm dying to see those too. I just wish they were easier to get a hold of. It seems like a rape revenge drama with a serial killer. Like, it's even hard to find like full descriptions of some of these.
It is. It's shocking, especially now. Especially the last few years. There's been so much about women filmmakers and raising up women filmmakers, and there's been all this talk in the Oscars and all this talk everywhere about, we need to look at the women filmmakers more, and they've been so neglected. And you get Italy's perhaps most important female filmmaker. And for world cinema, to be nominated for an Academy Award, which is the thing I love, she's often sort of, thought of as lesser to the bigger talents, whom all of them I love, but yet she kind of made that international jump when a few of them were really flagging. But it's like, why is she so absent from all these conversations? Why?
Because what we were saying earlier, she doesn't tell conventional, digestible, safe stories. People don't know what to do with her films.
Which is just shows how typical it is, like what we expect from women as filmmakers. I guess you can't be, it's like Petrie in a way. Petrie is a hard sell because he is impossible to tag or market.
Which makes him great.
Yeah.
Well, to us anyway.
And it's like, how do you sell, if she had been making like rape revenge films or these dramas about everyday women's lives, then maybe, you know, we would have had a huge thing. You know, all her films had been about Giancarlo's wives, long-suffering wives. Then maybe she would have got the focus. But I just think it's absolutely disgusting because her work is, you know, I've seen a lot of Italian comedy and it is some of the best, like total top tier stuff. On a par, you know, and it sells some of the stuff that is considered top tier as well, because it was just, she is using established tropes, but she's just so fresh and subversive in how she uses them.
The documentary I would recommend, though there are some just a little boring parts, and then also some of the subtitles are white over really white, black and white films, which made it nearly impossible. But it was interesting too, like, we're talking about the American films. As soon as Harvey Keitel shows up being dubbed in Italian in one clip, I'm like, wait a second, what's going on here? But yeah, he worked with her, I think, a couple times, it sounds like. But I would recommend that. I would also recommend a book by Grace Russo Ballaro called Man in Disorder, which is really like the thing that Wertmüller was so on about, was man in disorder. She even talks in the documentary about how, I think it was like the French Legion wanted to give her a medal and they asked what she wanted on it. And she said, man in disorder. And she said, they never called me back after that. This Ballaro book is fantastic. It's very thin and it's way overpriced on Amazon. It's $160 right now. So don't pay that. Find it for cheaper. Get it from the library. It's much better that way. And yeah, it's really well done. She did a great amount of research and it really concentrates on these early films. We talked about that box set earlier, which is like Swept Away, Seduction of Mimi, Love and Anarchy, and Seven Beauties. And it really concentrates on that period of time. So I highly recommend that. Oh yeah.
Can we also mention she was married to Enrico Job, who was like a set and costume designer, not Giancarlo Giannini's. I saw one in one interview. Your husband, no. Giancarlo.
Really? Oh my God.
Well, they work together, so naturally they must be married.
Yeah, because how would she have managed, you know, without having a big star husband?
They definitely talk about Job in that documentary and show all of these little miniature versions of sets that he decorated and all these beautiful costumes that he designed. It was amazing.
We didn't really talk about them, but the sets in, like, not just the sets when she's using, like, Swept Away, when she's using locations or sets are incredible in all of her films. And I'm really all about, like, the visual. I love costumes. I love little details in sets. And her films are like a sweetie jar to me because there's some similarities to Fellini in there because his set design was often crazy. She's not as avant-garde as Fellini, but just all the little details that are in there.
Seven Beauties was the first of her films that I saw, and it was a couple years, probably until around when we did that Petrie series, like you were saying, until I saw some more of them. It's easy to love a sort of standalone film for itself without thinking a ton about the director's overall career. But when I saw Love and Anarchy, the set details and the costume design, I was like, oh, this woman is, she knows.
Yeah, I think it was the same for me. I saw Seven Beauties and then for whatever reason didn't go any further. And then it was only because I was like deliberately, you know, making a concerted effort to like get hold of all this Italian comedy and watch it, that I got into the other stuff. And then I remember seeing Seduction of Mimi and just being so gutted that I hadn't seen it when we did the Petrie. because there were so many parallels to just in that one, without giving too much away. You've basically got this guy who he is a factory worker. It's got a lot of parallels to Seven Beauties in a way. He's a factory worker who keeps accidentally finding himself in the wrong place at the wrong time and gets inadvertently involved with the mafia, and just, it is so ridiculous. And he means well, but he's also kind of self-absorbed and a bit selfish as well, but he's not like a downright horrible person, even though he does horrible things. His ridiculousness in that just reminded me so much of the Petrie film, when in the Petrie film, and I'm quite sure now after seeing the others, that's why he was cast for that. Because in that film he plays a journalist who he's married to, is it Nella Muti or someone like that? Or he's got a very young, sort of glamorous feminist wife who won't cook his dinner. And his female co-worker won't sleep with him, and he's like marching around, he's crying. And I'm quite convinced. Showing his cock and going, what's wrong with it? Is it too small?
Why isn't anyone interested?
It's so fun. That one's never had any sort of decent release, but it was on YouTube at one point with subs, amazingly. But I'm quite convinced now that's why he was cast for that role, because it is very similar to the stuff that he does in Mimi. In Love and Anarchy's not quite as bad, but he's got that ridiculous freckle face.
Yeah, he's ridiculous in other ways.
And the crazy hair.
And Swept Away. Oh my God.
Talking of people thinking misogynist, see, I think Swept Away is fucking hilarious.
It's hilarious. It also has so many genuinely erotic scenes.
It does. And again, it's a good parallel to Ferrari with La Cagna, because it's a similar story. I saw some people recently going absolutely nuts over that film Overboard with Goldie Hawn and like how misogynist. Oh, this woman falls overboard and this guy makes her his sex slave. And I remember seeing that when it came out and finding it mildly amusing. I haven't seen it since the 80s, but
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
Oh, well, Goldie Hawn is this posh, stuck-up cow, and I wonder if it was influenced by Swept Away.
It sounds like it.
She is on a boat. And actually, now I'm saying this out loud, I'm like,
It's the same film.
The carpenter, she's rude to him. She falls overboard and loses her memory. So the whole... And he claims her as his wife because she has amnesia as his way of getting revenge, and makes her look after his like 5 kids because he's like a widowed dad and he lives on a farm. He's like a total hick. And they were so outraged, this bubble of people recently. I don't know if Overboard's been re-released or something, but I saw some backlash.
I think it's getting remade, maybe?
Has it been remade? Why would you remake it?
So
it's kind of
Swept Away was remade.
Oh God, don't. Not the fucking Madonna one.
Yeah.
With Madonna. I've never seen it and I never want to, but the fact that it exists is hilarious.
Yeah, it was remade, it was remade with Eugenio Derbez and Anna Faris. So that
what? Overboard?
Yeah, from 2018. Yeah.
What are the odds?
I don't know.
What are the odds that we would get both a Swept Away remake and an Overboard remake?
It's mildly amusing, Overboard, but that was probably where it was. They were probably reacting to the remake. Then there was some, but I was looking at the comments thinking, you need to see Swept Away. If you think
you'll be horrified. We should do a Swept Away
episode. Like a sweet romantic comedy.
Oh yeah, no, we have to do a Swept Away episode at some point and talk about the remakes.
No,
I had no idea that that Seduction of Mimi led to Which Way Is Up, the Richard Pryor comedy. I haven't seen Which Way Is Up, and I don't know how long. So now I need to go back and rewatch that and watch Seduction of Mimi. Yeah.
In what way?
Wertmüller is credited as screenwriter, and it says based on an original story by.
Wonderful.
That's amazing. Yeah,
she's everywhere. She's so influential. Even on Hollywood.
She's still around. She's 92 years old. And unfortunately, when she passes away, so many people are going to glom onto her like, oh my God, yeah, we've been a fan of hers all this time. And
liars.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like,
yeah, it's like, where were you? Where were you asking for the fucking disc? Where were you buying the disc? Create a market then.
if Marty stands up and says, I was a fan, I'll be like, yeah, okay, I understand you were. But if suddenly all these other people, he was in the documentary for sure. And it was funny because he was like, yeah, I didn't know what to think of her stuff when I first saw it. And I was glad. I was like, okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
The first time you see one of her films, even if you know the plot description and maybe you've seen some Fellini or something, but I feel like you really are just surprised from one scene to the next, and there's no way to know what to expect or like how it's going to make you feel.
Absolutely.
Which is what's great.
What cinema should be about, really. I think the thing about Italian comedy in general, not just these films, is it's so unmined that, like, even for me, you just went headfirst into this huge mission to, like, for instance, get my hands on every film that Marcello Mastroianni had been in, and I still haven't watched them all, but and just things like that, it constantly surprises me. Even when I think I've seen it all, I will discover somebody else and another whole director with a load of stuff. And I think for film fans, where it's getting harder and harder to find fresh old stuff because so much is easily available now, it's like it's there beckoning you like a little journey, like come on in, because there's so much to discover. It's just if people could just get beyond their like initial idea about what constitutes an Italian comedy, because the one that I get a lot is, they're not very funny though, and it's all based on assumption, or they're sexist, or, you know, culturally they don't cross over, because I don't think that's true, especially on the like art house end, where you have these directors talking about these big universal themes. So they are. I don't think you have to understand anything about the history to understand like a character being pushed to the brink and like how absurd it is. So it's like, it's there. And I think everybody listening to this episode should go out afterwards and buy all the Wertmüller DVDs or Blu-rays, or Samm will come round and
burn your house to the ground.
Wow.
I haven't made that threat in a while, so
no,
it's genuine.
Create a market and then we might get more. They'll be like, these Blu-rays are selling really well.
I mean, nothing like the threat of arson to spice up your life a little bit.
Well, normally this is the place where I say, let's take a break and play a preview for next week's show. But next week, I'm talking about a bunch of silent films. So I could play some music, or maybe some talking heads, maybe Orson Welles talking about how great Buster Keaton is.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles. And it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening Buster Keaton. He was, as we're now beginning to realize, the greatest of all the clowns in the history of the cinema.
But I'm not going to. So next week, we're going to talk about Buster Keaton films. Prepare yourselves, because it is quite a long discussion. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Sam and Kat. So Sam, what has been keeping you busy lately?
One thing that is relevant to this episode is I wrote a book about World War II movies called The Legacy of World War II in European Art House Cinema, which does have a big section on Wertmüller and Seven Beauties in particular. It should be out later this spring from McFarland. And
Kat, how about you? What's going on in your world?
I've just been doing a lot of stuff for Patreon recently on Kat Ellinger's Confessions of a Silly Slut. It's Satanic Feminism Month this month, because it's Women's History Month, so I thought I'd
Isn't all feminism satanic?
Hopefully.
Well, there's going to be a lot of films in it.
If you're doing it right.
Yeah, if you're doing it right,
with the
then
women's,
yes.
And I'm also launching like a little YouTube spot for the people that aren't on Patreon. Just like a little regular thing to do with Diabolique, magazine, which I should mention, we've just had a whole new upgrade to our website, so go on over and check that out, because it's looking all nice and snazzy now, and quite posh. So we got some exciting stuff coming out on there. But yeah, check me out on the Patreon for all the satanic feminism.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website, projectionboothpodcast.com, where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find a link over to Patreon, where you can make a donation to the show. Every donation we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.